Hi everyone, this is Drew Wharton from Nimble Leader along with Ed Flanagan. Ed is Managing Director with Nimble Leader. He's a CPA MBA. He's also Director with Expense Reduction Analysts, a global cost reduction firm with best practice capability addressing both indirect and direct costs. Ed, before we jump into our session today, would you have anything to add?
Sure do, Drew. Thank you for the introduction. I'm looking forward to this discussion, and I think we've got a lot of value that we can cover today going over the various slides.
Thanks, Ed. During our time today, we will review and discuss practical short-term ways to reduce costs for your business. Okay, let's jump into our first session on how to reduce costs now.
So Ed, I've often heard you say companies overpay suppliers by 10 to 30%. Why is this the case?
Well, Drew, what we find is that if you're selling something, the goal of any supplier is to win business at the best margins that they can. What they try to do is make it difficult for you to get the lowest prices.
Ed, can you share with the group your thoughts on the top 10 procurement misconceptions? What do you see most often?
Yeah, Drew, we've come up with 10 top misconceptions, and some of the bigger ones are a lot of times we find that our clients are very loyal to their suppliers. And a lot of times the suppliers are like family, they're their golf buddy or maybe a relative. And this often leads to higher prices. We found an example where there's a printing company that had no price increases over the last 10 years. We got involved and found savings of over 62%. The other area we find is that a lot of our clients say, oh, we got a great price on a product, and what they bought more than they needed. So we had an instance where they paid, $10,000 for 1,000 product supply, and it would take them 5 years to use up that supply. So that's not really savings. And another one is their purchasing they fail to ask the correct questions when they go out to negotiate. They fail to ask for prebates, they fail to ask for rebates. And we found that in 90% of the cases, companies will commit one of these 10 misconceptions, which contribute to the overspending of 10 to 30%. And this can lead to significant opportunities to recover what we call a hidden cash flow.
Okay, so Ed, these are really glaring examples, and you and I have talked about this before, and you said that there is a path to excellence. Can you share what your insights are as it relates to that comment?
We've highlighted 10 paths to excellence, which are best practices. And some of the biggest ones we find is our clients don't validate their purchase history. We found a situation with a manufacturing company where they had 9 different locations, and each location had a different price for the same services they were receiving. We also found another manufacturer where they had 4 T1 lines, told accounting that they're going to reduce it down from 4 down to 2, and that was never done. And we were able to recover almost $90,000. And we had another example where a company had a nice service for their employees where they were providing daycare, and they were spending over $19,000 a month on diapers. So the thing is, where were those diapers going? And when the CEO heard about this, she was very upset. Another example is you need to understand the suppliers and their industries as well as you do your industry. So it's not a typical strength of companies who are focused on direct costs. What we focus on is the indirect cost. So you want to make sure that you future-proof your contracts. Don't let the suppliers recover their margins once you negotiated with them. And the thing is, a lot of times it's impossible for companies to have a domain level expertise across all these expense areas. Another one where we find is that our companies are not reevaluating the current supplier relationships. A lot of times the person at the company that gets to go to the golf outings and the ball games is not the best person to negotiate price. We had an example in the Midwest where there was a manufacturer that had just come back from a golf outing to Scotland with 3 of the heads of purchasing. And what we found is after we negotiated and found 40% saving, they can't even get golf balls out of that FedEx supplier anymore. We have found that the longer the supplier relationships, the less likely you will have the best prices or services unless you work for it every day. And remember, the incumbent supplier doesn't think that you'll change. This is called the inertia of incumbency. They know that it's a lot of work to negotiate and make them sharpen their pencil. So they know that a lot of the companies don't have the time to do that.
Okay, so these examples are really tangible and it really kind of makes sense. In our last conversation, you also showed the importance of decide, implement, monitor. Why is this so important to the overall management of the indirect costs?
Well, the important thing there, Drew, is you want to, if you negotiate savings, you want to implement as soon as possible and stop that cash leak. And then once you get the savings, you want to make sure you monitor it, because what will happen is that suppliers will have a tendency to creep prices up in the future. So you want to make sure you're diligently looking all the invoices to fight the price creep.
In previous conversations, you've identified that many companies, 80% of their suppliers often cost them a great deal of money. Your position here is quite significant. You reference something called the Pareto principle when speaking on this topic. Can you share what you mean by this?
Sure. The Pareto principle is the 80-20 rule. And in this case, what we're saying is that 80% of a company's spend is usually through the top 20% of the vendors. So where companies have multiple sites, management may not be aware of the number of vendors. So when we find there's a lot of vendors out there, it's a good opportunity for us to save money by consolidating the vendors and having the vendors sharpen their pencil so that they can pick up more of the business from the company.
Okay, so in building on this, when you do a drill down on the subcategories in Pareto, what does this tell you?
It tells us a couple of things. If you look at the chart above, you can see in the green bar, it reflects your top 10 vendors. And it also highlights areas with larger spends that are good possibility for savings. And it also tells us which expense areas could be quick hits for savings.
So Pareto, the drill down, and then you've also mentioned something where you talk about supplier density. Why is supplier density so important in this whole process?
Well, the important thing there is that when we analyze the spend, we find that there's, if you look at the analysis up here, the top 5 vendors make up a large portion of spend. But if you look at the last $18 million of spend, that is through 94 vendors. Why do they have so many vendors and such a small spend? And then the thing is, are the top vendors treating you right? We had a situation where we showed a client recently, who the top 3 vendors were. And they said, that top vendor, I understand that they really treat us well, but that second vendor, I didn't realize that we were spending so much money with them because they don't treat us that well. And, why are there so many vendors making up such a small portion of your spend?
Okay, so this just kind of breeds inefficiency. And so this one simple thing, I think, has a huge impact in terms of where companies might be able to find prospective savings. Now, in the prior conversation, you mentioned that there are certain expense categories that provide fertile ground for immediate savings. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, I want to mention that we've been in business for 30 years, so we have a good handle on how much savings percentage we can get in each area. And also we have a good idea on how to phase the implementation. So there's a lot of categories that might be quick hits like payroll processing, waste management, office, and cleaning supply.
Okay, so very tangible, based on historical performance in terms of how you've worked with many, many clients. And so this seems like low-hanging fruit, that many leadership teams could access without a whole lot of effort or change in strategy. So I think that's great. Now, Ed, can you talk to us about portfolio analysis of a company's spend and why this is so important?
So, Drew, when we get a company to provide us with a 12-month general ledger of all their expenses, so we don't need payroll, we don't need the balance sheet, just their expenses, what we do is we break it down to 4 different quadrants. And as you can see, the actionable categories are the ones that we focus on because we have deep experience in those. We can also look at the discoverable categories once we obtain additional data. And then we've got a couple categories that have lower return on investment. And these are categories that take a lot of time and they don't have big savings. There's minimal savings opportunities in those areas. And then the other quadrant is non-addressable. And these are payments that we can't help. And it's things like payments to the taxing authorities and a lot of intercompany payments.
Okay, so you share with prospective clients the breakdown of the buckets: actionable, discoverable, lower ROI, and non-addressable. And so there's a path here in terms of where they might go next. Ed, you often speak of a timing sequence when savings are realized. Can you share with us what you mean, your experience with this?
Sure. So Drew, if we identify, let's say, 10 to 12 expense categories, we could start all 10 to 12 of those at one time, but it would be overwhelming for the client. So what we try to do is we try to start 3 or 4 at a time. And then once we get them to the point where savings start occurring, then we go on and tackle additional categories. So this chart shows you over the first 90 to 120 days, there's no savings because at that point, we're gathering data and negotiating with suppliers. So the savings start once we implement the savings. And then we share 50% with the client in the first 2 years. And then after 2 years, the client gets 100% of the savings. So you can see in the chart where the savings really peak up after the second year.
Okay, so long-term impact in terms of working with you to drive what those potential savings are. Now, Ed, with actionable reviews, you speak of recommended versus maximized cost reduction opportunities. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so the recommended cost savings are those that were actionable, that we have deep experience and we can start right away. And then maximum are once we get additional data in the discoverable section and also the lower ROI spends. If you add the 3 of those together, that's the maximum saving.
Okay, great. This last chart was something that was really of interest to me in terms of granular detail drill down with your spend view capability. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so this gives the client very detailed knowledge about things that are going on within the company that they may not realize. So in this situation, we have employee reimbursements, and we had a situation where one of the employees was a salesperson, and we found out that their reimbursements exceeded 3 times their salary. And when the CFO heard that, she right away said, we've got to really look into that. So what we're able to do is give them that very detailed, granular data so they can see where there's things that are really out of whack, and they can explore that and get more detail.
Now, Ed, you have a number of examples in terms of success stories that you've had in the past. Can you drill down more specifically in terms of some of the things that we have up here on the slide today?
Sure. We had an example where we found over $660,000 savings, which equated to 40% of their spend. And it came after we negotiated with the incumbent supplier who had raised prices over the last 5 years, well in excess of what the market allowed. There's another example where we found savings of $460,000 or 15%. That was attributed to using a different price index than the one that was stated in the contract. We also found over $900,000 in savings, which was 22%, in a multi-plant manufacturer. And in addition to those savings, we also found soft savings where we're able to negotiate down from 100 suppliers down to 3. So in a lot of our examples, we find both hard savings dollars and soft savings. So hard savings are the dollars related to that category, and soft savings are savings that accrue to the back office, the accounting department, for example, because now they only have to cut checks for 3 suppliers instead of 100 suppliers.
Okay, so that's a great drill down. You have talked about deep experience that you have with, for example, 700 consultants. Can you share how this works to the advantage of a client?
Yeah, so we've been around for 30 years, and we're in 42 countries. We've got 700 consultants, and half of the consultants are what we call category experts. And they have anywhere from 15 to 30 years experience in all the various indirect expense areas. So we're able to get that knowledge base to work for us. And it's a lot different than, some companies bring a guy in from Penn State and he's 21 years old. He doesn't have that in-depth knowledge of the industry. So we have deep expertise in in many years, we provide benchmark data across all these categories, and it's incredibly helpful in identifying specific and tangible opportunities. And the thing is, our guys are totally focused on implementation and monitoring. And the way we work is we share in the savings. So if the savings don't accrue, we don't get paid. So we're focused on getting those savings implemented. And importantly, our capacity to implement frees up our clients. They have extra time to work on other priorities.
Ed, you had indicated that you need a trial balance across categories, and there's minimal involvement of client time. What happens once you receive that trial balance?
So Drew, once we get that trial balance, what we do is we compare the annual spends to other companies that are the same size and in the same industry. And we'll do that at no cost to you. And what we'll do is a quick scan to see if there is significant cash being left on the table at your company. And if there is, where it might be, how much, and how we can get it back, funding more company initiatives.
So this really sounds great. And once you get sign off, what happens? What are the next steps in terms of deliverables?
So the first step, if we're going to tell you that we're going to find savings, we have to establish a baseline. So what we have to do is gather data to find out what the services that you're getting or what things you're buying. And the important thing, in addition to getting the current prices, is we need to understand what your quality and service requirements are. So once we get all that detail, we'll come back to you with a baseline report, and we'll say, hey, you're spending $100,000 on this category. We'll list out all the SKU numbers. We'll give you the current prices you're paying, and then we'll identify your service and quality requirements are. The next thing is we go out for a market assessment and analysis. We do a very detailed RFP based on the data we found from the baseline report. We go out to your incumbent supplier, and we work with other suppliers that we've worked with in the past that can provide the same quality and service. We give them 2 or 3 weeks to respond to the RFP. And once that comes back, we provide you with a recommendation report, and that'll identify the savings opportunities. It may say that the current supplier is offering 15%, and we've got 2 or 3 other suppliers that are offering 20 to 30%. And we'll make a recommendation, but it's up to you to decide. You may want to be loyal to your current supplier. So once you decide which supplier to go to, we work with that selected supplier to make sure all those prices that we negotiated are in their system, so that when you start purchasing, you get the right price. And then for the next 24 months, we provide a monitoring of those purchases over the next 24 months. And we do 2 things. We actually calculate the actual savings on each item or service that you receive. And then we also make sure that the price creep hasn't occurred. And if the supplier does overcharge you, we make sure that they issue back a credit, and then we follow up on that credit.
Okay, Ed, so that sounds really great. Can you share with us your approach? When do clients usually see results?
Drew, it depends on the category. Some categories are take more time than others, but typically within about 8 to 9 weeks from when we receive the data, we can get the savings started. So we need cooperation both from the client and from the suppliers to respond timely. And then, once we get the results, we start sharing in those savings.
Okay, everyone, we're at the end of our time today. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to Ed or myself. And if we have your email address, we'd be happy to send you a copy of today's slides. Take care and have a great rest of your day.